You did everything you could, but it still didn't work out. So here's the thing about disappointment. It's really uncomfortable, maybe even painful, but I think it's a really important part of living. And I know that so many of us are feeling it right now. That moment when something you'd been counting on just does not go the way that you'd hoped. It's like you're left holding this empty space where your expectations used to be. It hurts, it's confusing, but it also teaches you something that's hard to learn any other way. I also think there's something deeper playing out here that's more than just a letdown. In moments like these, disappointment can sometimes even feel like a kind of grief, that hollow, maybe even a little bit scary ache that something we believed in has slipped away. It's a kind of mourning for the future that we'd imagined, for the possibilities that we'd hoped for. It's one of life's really tough lessons. It reminds us that the world doesn't always follow our plans. When my wife Maddy died, and she was only 42, I felt overwhelming grief, but weirdly, I was also disappointed. There was this whole future that I'd imagined for us together, and it was just gone. I'd imagined us growing old together, watching our two daughters grow up side by side. There was this disappointment that we'd never get to take those holidays we'd planned. And I don't think it was just sadness. It was this ache of losing something that felt like it was within reach, and then it was ripped away. Maybe even a sense of unfairness, a kind of what just happened. And that disappointment, it ran deep. It was in every corner of our life together. It reminded me of how fragile our hopes can be. And you know, it's tempting to dismiss disappointment as just a passing feeling, but I think it's more complicated than that. There is a reason why it does feel like a kind of mourning, a grief for the future that we thought was just within reach. Philosophers like Schopenhauer argued that disappointment was a universal truth. He believed that to desire anything, love, success, a better world, was to sign up for disappointment because in his view, life was always bound to fall short of our expectations. It's kind of grim, but to him, this gap between our wants and reality was a kind of suffering that we just had to accept. And maybe, in a grim kind of way, he's right. But I don't think it's all hopeless. Søren Kierkegaard, the marry and you'll regret it guy, saw things a little bit differently. He did think of life as a series of struggles, but not against disappointment, but against the deeper despair that disappointment can lead to. Kierkegaard suggested that hope isn't about expecting life to deliver exactly what we want. It's more about choosing to go forward anyway, finding meaning in life's uncertainties, even when the outcome is bleak. For him, hope isn't about securing the future, it's about grounding yourself in something deeper that can carry you through any setback. From a psychological perspective, disappointment is rooted in how our brains process anticipation and reward. Maybe let's think about it in the context of the US election. Every poll you see, every conversation with somebody who shares your hopes, your brain is lighting up with dopamine, that little spark of feel-good anticipation. It's a little bit addictive. But when the outcome shifts the other way, that chemical rush gets cut off and you're left with an emptiness that feels a bit like a gut punch. It's not just disappointment, it's this quiet echo of grief for the possibility that you've been holding on to. And I think it's different from regret. Regret is personal. It's about wishing you'd made a different choice. But disappointment, especially in things outside of our control, has this powerlessness to it. That same feeling of helplessness that grief brings. You did everything you could, but it still didn't work out. And if you're an optimist, someone who truly believed in a better outcome, research tells us that the pain feels even worse. Optimism builds up these big, beautiful expectations that reality can't always fulfill. So what's the answer? Maybe it's a kind of hope that isn't tied to expecting everything to work out every time. Kierkegaard would say this is about finding meaning in how we respond rather than getting caught up in what we achieve. Hope, in this sense, is a little bit different from optimism. Optimism is predicting that everything will go well, but hope, the kind of hope Kierkegaard is talking about, is trusting that whatever happens, we can still find a way forward. It's what helps us cope with life's disappointments without giving up on life itself. And I do want to say, for those of you who feel like things are going well for you today, remember that life has a funny way of leveling things out. Today, you might be celebrating, but tomorrow, it's going to bring its own letdowns. I think this is a chance for all of us to show some empathy for those who didn't get what they wanted this time. You see, life's up and downs are inevitable, and each of us at some time will find ourselves on both sides of that line. Maybe the best we can do is to acknowledge it, learn from it, and then support each other as we go through those ups and downs. The thing is that disappointment is not something we'd ever wish for, but it's part of life. And maybe like grief, it's one of the better teachers we've got.